Hi, boys and girls. This is Mrs. Rotondi, and I am going to be reviewing with you some information about soil. Today, I'm going to be focusing on soil erosion, and I'm focusing on this because you have a final project that's going to be due. And if you listen carefully, you're going to get some tips that you could use to help you with your final project on soil. So let's get started. What exactly is erosion? Erosion occurs when soil is moved from one place to another, and this usually happens because of water or wind. So water flowing, maybe it rains and the water flows down the hill. The water could pick up pieces of soil and carry it to a new place down the hill or down, even it could carry it even down a ditch and into a creek and down the creek and keep on going. Also, wind can do the same thing. If wind comes across the land and the soil is exposed, it can pick up particles of soil and blow it to another location. So that is what erosion is. Let me move my head. So sometimes erosion can be a good thing. If you remember when we studied ancient Egypt, we studied how the Nile River brought fertile soil to the people in Egypt when it flooded each year. So that was where the soil was being eroded from another place and flowing along the Nile River. And then when it got to the area in Egypt where the Nile was flooding, it took and deposited that soil in a new location. So it took it from one place, carried it down the Nile River, and put it in another place. So it is erosion. But in this case, it was a good thing for the people of Egypt because it brought good fertile soil for them to use for farming. However, it's usually not really a good thing. Usually it's a bad thing to have erosion. So if you look at this farmer here, this is going to be a bad thing for him because you can see that erosion is occurring all through his field. You can see it off to the sides here. It looks like it's coming down the hills back here too. So the soil is being washed away from his farm, and that is not going to be very helpful for him when he is growing crops. So what can we do when erosion is causing problems? Move my head again. So the first thing that you might want to try if you are having trouble with erosion is to plant something. In an area where soil's being eroded, it can help to plant things like grasses or trees. The roots from the plants act like fingers that grow into the ground and hold on to the soil, making it more difficult for it to be washed away. If you take a look at our pictures up here, you can definitely see that with this plant that was pulled out of the ground. The roots brought some of the soil up when they were pulled out because they are like fingers just grabbing onto that soil. So it's going to be more difficult for the soil to be washed away when it's being held together by those roots or held in place by the roots. Shift my head again. Oh, my head got bigger. I just want to move it. I don't want it to be bigger. All right. If you are not very successful at being able to grow plants in the place where you're having trouble with erosion, you might want to try rocks instead. So placing rocks could stop or slow the movement of the soil. You can see in this diagram that we have here, they have some plants that are growing at the top, but then they've put like some crushed rocks down along the bottom here that's along the hillside or along the slope, and then there's some bigger rocks on top of that. And there are rocks in a ditch area here. So as the water is flowing down this slope and to be taken away in the ditch area, it's not picking up the soil and taking it with it. So we have some examples here, pictures where people have used rocks on their property to help with erosion. So we've got some rocks over here, and then in front of this house, we have some rocks as well. All right. Now, these pictures should look a bit familiar to you if you recall what we studied about ancient China, Greece, and Rome. All of those civilizations had areas that were pretty hilly, so they chose to use terraced farming to help them with growing crops. So in some cases, people use the terrace farming just because it's easier to grow crops on something that's flat. Like if I'm a farmer, I want to grow crops on something that's flat. I don't want to try to walk on something that's steep and sloped like this and try to walk on that to plant my crops and to try to harvest my crops. By having that flatter surface, it makes it easier for me to work with my crops. But also, when you have levels of flat surfaces like that, it's going to slow down the water. So when it rains and water is at the top of your slope, it wants to come down the slope. Well, if my slope is nice and just flat like this, it's going to rush right on down, and it might pick up a lot of soil and take it right down the hill. But if you put in those flat places, that's going to slow the water down as it's trying to come down the hill, and you're not going to have as many problems with erosion. Okay, here's another thing that you could do if you want to keep your soil in place and prevent erosion. This is building a retaining wall. So when you build a retaining wall, you put the wall in so that you keep the soil on one side of the wall. So even when water comes down, the wall is blocking the soil from moving to the other side, so it's not going to be washed away. On the top photograph, you can see a retaining wall in the process of being made. So they actually look like they kind of scooped away some of the soil so they can make a nice straight retaining wall there to stop continued erosion in that area. And then on the bottom photograph, there's a retaining wall that's been there for a while. You can see that has some age on it. And that they put that retaining wall there because they didn't want the soil to be eroding and ending up in the roadway. That could be very dangerous if your soil ends up in the roadway. So they've got a retaining wall up there. They've also got plants along the top there to try to help slow down that erosion. It looks like in one area they even have some rocks up there. But this retaining wall also looks like it's aging a bit, so it might need some work before that retaining wall could actually collapse as it grows older. So you have to take care of those retaining walls and make sure that they're strong enough to hold the soil behind them. Okay, well, what if you are having trouble with erosion, but it's not coming from water, it's coming from wind? If that's the case, then you might want to give yourself a windbreak. So I see these a lot in the farms here in Hanover County. There's farms near my house that have windbreaks. And a windbreak is when a farmer plants plants like trees and shrubs around the outside edges of a field to keep the wind from being able to blow right across the field and blow soil away or damage the small crops that are starting to grow. So this bottom photograph here is a great example of how the windbreak works. If you have the wind coming in, the wind is like this blue. If it's coming in and we're at a level where it would sweep right across all the crops and right across the soil, then these windbreaks cause the wind to slow down and push upwards. So the majority of the wind force is going to be up here higher, and it's going to protect this lower level where we have our crops and our soil. So especially when a farm might be between crops and you might have more exposed soil, it's going to be really important to have that windbreak so that the wind can't just come along and blow away any dry soil that is exposed to the elements. So soil is an important natural resource. It needs to be conserved. It takes a really long time to make new soil. So if your soil is being eroded, it's moving to another place, it would take you a long time to replace that soil where you're at. So we want to keep it where it belongs, and we can use those strategies we just went over. We can plant plants so that their roots hold on like fingers onto that soil to keep it from washing away. We can put rocks in the place of plants if the plants aren't really growing well, because the rocks can stay in place and slow down the flow of that water coming through and keep it from taking the soil with it. We can build a retaining wall so that we can keep the soil behind the wall and not let it go past the wall. We can do our terraced farming, so we have some flat areas. So as the water comes down the hill, it's having to slow down as it comes down the steps or down those terraces. And we also can build or plant a windbreak around a field if we're having trouble with the wind blowing away some of the soil and causing erosion. So when you are reading the problem that the school is having with their playground for your summative assessment at the end of the soil unit, I want you to think about these strategies and what strategies might be useful for the school. What could they put in place that could help save their playground? You might want to write a letter to the principal. You might want to build a model to show the principal what they could do to help save the playground. You might want to create a Google slide document with your plan. There's lots of different things that you could do to show the principal your plan for helping to save their playground. So get creative with that and let your teachers hear your plan for saving the playground. Thanks, guys. Have a great day.